is head of the tech transfer office at INESC TEC in the neighborhood. She is also European IPR Helpdesk Ambassador for Portugal. Her background is actually microbiology, if I'm right. A few weeks ago, we were in Lisbon in the meeting of professionals at the interface of science, and she gave a fantastic workshop and about this issue. And actually, we have a project here, and also me and Paulo, that I think is there, about research integrity. The project, the European project, its name is Integrity. You may Google it. And we have a task, along with the communication task, that is exploitation. And we start to deal with a thing that is exploitation. What is exploitation in a European project? And European projects now ask you to have a work package on exploitation. And we were producing, or we will produce in this project, educational materials, how to exploit, what is exploitation of education materials. So I was listening Catarina in Lisbon, and she was talking about that, because she works with lots of people working on softwares and things like that. And it was perfect. I understand lots of new things. So I decided to invite Catarina to explain us these issues. The first thought was, well, let's make a meeting between the group of people that is working in the project. No, let's make a webinar. This is a webinar. I hope there is some people on the other side of the YouTube channel seeing this webinar. And why not to open this webinar, that was a webinar for the project, to the people of I3S, because I think lots of you have lots of things that can be exploitable in this way. So thank you, Catarina, and I hope we all learn a lot with Catarina.
So thank you so much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here. And I actually framed this towards impact. Research impact is something that we are being called upon every other day. So it's something that we really need to tackle and to understand how we can boost our impact. So I would just like to tell you a small introduction to what we are going to talk today. We are going to talk mostly about this. And I would like to tell you about to start with the European paradox. The issue is that if you see the 10 global companies by market capitalization, there is none from Europe. So this is what it looks like out there, with China rising every day. Actually, today, Tencent is already more valuable than Facebook. And what we also know is that this comes from a long way. Even in '95, this was being identified. We have a lot of PhDs. We have a number of PhD per capita, and the amount of R&D money that is being poured into research is huge. But we are not seeing the societal outcomes of that. So it means that maybe we should try to tackle this issue. And it's really not a question of the money. If you see for Horizon 2020, we are spending quite a lot of 85 billion USD. But if you see all the budget from DARPA and what has came out of there, it was less than what we spent in 6 years. And a lot of things that we know today actually came out of there. So it's not really about the money that we're spending. It's how we are actually developing this through. What are we doing with our research results? Okay, so you have heard a lot about patents, I'm quite sure. So I'm not going to talk to you about patents, but I still need to talk to you a little bit about intellectual property rights. So what we also know is that we might be able to overcome the European innovation paradox through exploitation strategies, such as the one that Julie was discussing, and through intellectual property rights. It's not enough in today's world to publish a paper, even in a high impact journal. It's not enough. You have to do more than that. Now, you also may have heard about open science. Yeah? Yeah, your faces say yeah. Okay, so open science is still quite a misunderstood word. What is open and open science? And there's an interpretation that free should be available for free, but free is in freedom as a bird. It's freedom to fly. It's freedom to reuse results, not free as in €0. That's a huge difference, okay? And also, let me just tell you two cases of very, very successful diversification strategies for academia. One is the MP3 that maybe, well, for the older ones in the room, you may have heard of MP3. So how we were listening to music a few years ago. Well, it started as a case from the Fraunhofer. It was about to be launched publicly. So as in free, in zero, and available out there. And because the Technology Transfer Office said, well, we should make a patent on that, they actually earned a lot of money. The amount is undisclosed. But the patents just fell 2 years ago. But the amount of money that they produced was huge, really. And the other case, a very, very known case in Europe is maybe which of you know this? RTPA. So it's the recombinant tissue plasminogen activator. So this is the case for you guys. It actually was licensed by KUL, so the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium. It was licensed in the 80s to Genentech. The royalties, the revenue from those royalties allowed them to build a hospital, a university hospital there. So you see, these are highly successful cases from all kinds of impact that you look at them. So it's about money, but it was also about societal impact. So changing things. RTPA was a revolution as a treatment for people that were suffering from clots. So it has been really, really important. Now, what is impact? So you then struck the intruder with a bound PhD thesis. Yes, it was research with impact. That's not what we are looking for, right? We are not going to strike anyone with an amount of 500 pages, okay? So impact. I really like this framework from the University of Glasgow. It's a lot. It's about identifying, it's about enabling people, enabling results. It's about publicizing. It's about communication also, really. And it's about understanding kind of training that you could do, toolkit with practical resources, cases that people can use. Do I have an economical impact, a social impact, a policy impact? So these are all the kind of myriad of layers that we can look at. For any of you familiar with UK, you have for sure heard of the Research Excellence Framework, which went down on 2014, and there's a new one coming for the evaluation. And they have to produce a lot of impact cases. So they have to show what their research is about from this kind of type of impact that they are dealing, even for social sciences. So it's maybe a technology impact, a policy impact, environmental impact, social impact, and so on. If you look at their website, they are all listed there. They are all public there. You may want to check them out. They are really interesting, some of them, and there are a lot of cases. Okay. So just a reminder of what intellectual property rights are. So intellectual property covers copyright and industrial property. So you have heard for sure of patents, for sure. We have trademarks also, and a lot of other rights like design, trade secret, and so on. All of this you can license, okay? So what is soft IP? Because I actually named my presentation about soft IP. So soft IP are things that I don't need to register in order to have the right. So if you want to protect a technology, you have to file a patent for that. You're not the owner of that technology unless you file the patent, or else it's out there, right? But when you write a paper, when you write educational content, such as the ones that you were mentioning in your research project, if they are original, they are covered by copyright. And that copyright arises by the moment you have the research, the educational content, the educational materials. Okay, you may also call your project something that is quite original and different from any other projects, and it can be used as a trademark even though it's not registered. Okay, so soft IP is things that you don't have to register, but you still have a right to it. Okay? I'm moving. Okay, so there we go again. There's no registration required, although you can do it, and I strongly advise you to do it. So you have copyrights, you have trademarks, you have databases rights that you may also use for datasets. If you are doing sequencing, if you are doing any kind of dataset organization from, for instance, patient data, you are generating a database and you have some rights to it also. This is design, which I don't think that it's a very useful right for a research context, but still it can be unregistered and you still have rights to it. And also trade secrets. Now, trade secrets, we can use them, but as publicly funded research organizations, it's very hard to actually use them, because the commercial value of a trade secret has to come because it's secret. And that means that you cannot publish. So that goes against all the logic that we have in place. So I really discourage trade secrets in organizations such as ours, but they may arise from time to time. And if you have a project with a company that's fully funded by the company, eventually you can have trade secrets in place. So IP protection, I'm sure you have heard about this. It gives you the right, but not the obligation. It's a right, okay? So you are not forced to do it, but you have the right. You have the right to use, and you have the right to exploit commercially and to exclude others from doing that, okay? So as we are research organizations, what we do is we usually don't commercialize ourselves. What we look for are people that can actually commercialize in our behalf, and then we earn something out of it, okay? But the same thing goes for other types of materials, and we will get there. So also, something that is critical to understand is that in a product, you have different types of rights in place. If you are covering functionality, it's about the technology, then you have a patent. But you may be covering expression, so the copyright. Because, for instance, in our research materials and when we write them down, as we do, I could have done this slide in another different way. This is my expression of my idea. But someone else could express the same idea in a different way, and he would not be infringing my copyright. It's about an expression, okay? And trademarks. Trademarks, it's about differentiating in the market. So I don't. Okay, yeah. This computer is an ESUS, okay? My computer is a Mac. Still computers, but they are different, and actually we differentiate them by brand, right? Okay. Now, who knows what this is? My former students know that I ask a lot of questions to the audience. Right, that's aspirin, correct. And this is the aspirin patent from 1900. Yeah. So it was filed in the last year of the 19th century. And it's just this. It's brilliant. I actually read it today. It's really nice. It's so different from what we do today. So there's a patent. And what we know, and we can associate this aspirin with it, because this is not aspirin, this is acetyl salicylic acid actually, right? But I associate the name, the trademark, to this molecule. And this was actually commercial from aspirin back a lot of time ago. So as you see, the molecule has the patent. The patent was actually protecting the molecule itself and the method for synthesis of this molecule. And it's all described here. It's brilliant. But then no one goes to the pharmacy and asks for, I would like 1 gram of acetyl salicylic acid, right? No one does this, right? We just go and ask for, give me some aspirin, right? Yeah. So the thing is, I can have different rights with different validities, because a patent lasts for 20 years, a copyright for 70 years, but the trademark, it can go on and on and on. And the functionality that it protects is also different. So here, it's just a brand, it's a trademark. Here, what I'm protecting is exactly how I was synthesizing that molecule, right? Okay, and that's, I think, the last thing that you will hear from me about patents today. Copyrights. So copyrights are written as this. So it's the protection of literary, so anything that you write, and artistic works. So paintings, photographs, architecture, and so on. All of that has copyrights. From the moment that you finish your work, the copyright is there. It belongs to you. And then you can assert it. For instance, when you submit a paper to a journal, you have to assert your copyrights to the journal. Okay? And it includes writings, music, works of fine arts, and also computer programs. So for those of you that write software, it's also in here. And it protects the creative expression, not the ideas. So again, if you all know Romeo and Juliet, right? Everybody knows the story. For those of you who are Portuguese, do you know Amor de Perdição? And the story is? Yes, the same. A different expression. It has more characters, the setting is different, and so on, but the main idea is actually the same. So 2 different works of art about the same idea, but 2 different expressions, 2 different copyrights. Okay? You don't have to register, but if you want to register, you can register this. Now, what we also know from copyrights, from these works of art, let's call it like that, is that we can mix them together, right? There's a lot of things that you do in research that you are actually reusing your own work and the works of others. That's standing on the shoulder of giants, right? And what we know is that in a final work, this is software, but could it be any other thing, you can modify, you can combine them, and it creates what we call a derivative work. Okay? Now, what we want also to cover here is the distribution. You cannot go and just copy a whole book, can you? You cannot do this. You can cite a paper, but you're not copying the whole paper. There are, let's say, rules of engagement about this, okay? And that has to do with the degrees of freedom that you are enabling your users to have. Now, copyright usually has these 3 words: all rights reserved. What does it mean? It means that reuse requires permission from the owner. There's fair use, which is citation. That's what we do. We are not writing every single author about permission to use their paper, because that's considered fair use. But we cannot just go and grab a lot of pieces and put them together as if it was our own original work, right? Now, the other extreme is public domain. There is nothing out there. So what you are just putting it out there. Your contents may be used without permission, and you don't even have to cite. You don't even have to say who the original author was. Okay? So again, I don't think that public domain is a great tool for us as researchers, because we want acknowledgement, right? But there's something in between, which is I reserve some rights. And that is what licenses such as Creative Commons have achieved. So I'm giving some permission, but not all. And there are different specifications. Let's go. So the main permissions is about sharing, remixing. So these are doing derivative works and commercial. So I have the most open ones, which is C0, which is almost public domain, which means I'm retaining 0 rights, okay? But I want to be acknowledged. I don't care what you do with my thing. You can reuse it, redistribute it, you can change it. Just say that it was started by me, okay? And on the other scope, we have only for sharing, which would be say that it was done by me, but you can only use it to non-commercial purposes. And you cannot change it, so no derivatives. Okay? So this is the full scope. Now, something that has been happening for quite some time is that people that write software are also, and they don't know about open source licenses, sometimes use Creative Commons. Creative Commons are not the best for this. And also databases. Databases can be licensed under Creative Commons, we'll get there, but there are open databases licenses. So this is not, everything is a nail, and here's the hammer for that. There are very different things that you have to address. And this is for copyrights, not everything, not copyrights that are not software, okay? Now, when you go into the derivative works, the issue is that when you start mixing things from different sources that have different licenses, it can be sometimes hard to get license compatibility. This is a very weird concept. But for instance, let's say that part A is for non-commercial purposes. Let's say that part B allows commercial purposes, and you mix them all together in your original work, and then you want to license it commercially. You cannot do this, because there's part A there that says that it's only allowed for non-commercial purposes. That's where you have to deal with this kind of table, and this is a nightmare. This is exactly where, when we reach this stage, I have to go and talk to the researchers and say, can we change it? And it's really unfortunate, because people have spent a lot of time doing their research. They have reused the tools that were out there, and suddenly you're saying you have to redo this altogether. So one thing that actually goes from this is that, and also it's the previous one, is that by restricting to non-commercial purposes, you are hindering adoption. Okay? Because frequently I hear researchers saying, oh, this should be only for academic purposes. Okay, that's fine. But remember that if you do that, then companies won't uptake this. Okay, so it's about impact again. A little bit just on trademarks, just to give you an example of how powerful a trademark can be. So a trademark is just a name that you give to something that allows you to distinguish your product or service on the market. So if you're doing sequencing services, don't call it sex services, okay? It has to be a little bit more distinguishable than that. And as I'm sure that people from communication already told you, be consistent. Always use the same name. Because that actually goes into the brain and starts, building some brand recognition in there. It's really critical to be consistent. So if you are calling your project or your research results or your software Apple, call it Apple all the way through. Okay? Well, take care, don't infringe Apple rights. It should be quite distinguishable from that. I don't know how many of you know this, Gatorade. Do you know that it started from a university? Okay, yeah. So it started as a brand. The University of Florida filed for this brand. You know what this is. It has earned so far to the university $281 million USD in royalties. So you see the power of a brand. It was registered at a certain time point. They licensed it with the recipe for the drink, and it's huge, really. Now, just to conclude, a few remarks on using this. I know it was a lot, so let me give you some examples. First, know what you have. You have to know what you have. And what are you willing to allow people to do with your works? Are you looking for money? I want to make money, no matter what. Or are you looking for adoption? Or really, are you looking for restricting this to the academia bubble, and that's quite all right? Is there a community out there? Is there a community of practice? Are there rules of engagement in that community? Because if that community uses a certain type of license in it is used to something, then you should really, if that is your community of adoption, go and see what they are using. That's what you should do, because it really would simplify adoption. Now, data. How to deal with data. Data sets are being more and more out there. It's about open science, open data, and you have to, in my view, and this is my view, I think that we should, as researchers, ensure attribution. It's critical for us that we get recognized. So that means that the C0 license that is frequently used for data is, in my view, not a good one, because it does not ensure that you get cited. There are two kinds of licenses for data that I would recommend. Firstly, the open data licenses from the Open Knowledge Foundation, but then if you want to use a Creative Commons license, then you have to make sure it's version 4. If it's not version 4, it cannot be used for data, because data is not on the terms of the license. This is very technical, I know, but still, this is where you can help us as technology transfer professionals, okay? If you have doubts, I'm sure that that my colleagues here can actually recommend it to you. Now, soft IP about works of art. Let's put contents, let's put questionnaires, scales. measuring scales. For instance, if you are measuring arthritis or things like that, if you have developed it, put copyright. You can do the all rights reserved. Or if you want to, let's make it broader, just use one of these and be consistent. If you are, it's again consistency. I have a researcher there that in a stream of papers from 10 years now, he consistently uses the same name for his system. And it has a lot of soft IP inside it, consistently. Every research paper consistently uses the same name. I haven't registered the trademark. I'm not interested in doing that, but it's really useful in dissemination. Now, you may ask, well, if I'm licensing it non-commercially, because I feel that I want this to be used non-commercially, because if people use it commercially, then I feel that I should be paid. What can I do? Well, it's easy. There's something out there called dual licensing. It means that you have different licenses in place for the same asset, but people pick the one that they want to comply with. So I can have a non-commercial license for research purposes, or I can say, if you want this for commercial purposes, then you have to pay. This is also possible to do, okay? And software, again, there are free software licenses out there from the Free Software Foundation or the Open Source Initiative. And most of all, it's also a communication exercise. So again, be consistent, even in the GitHub or the repository you use. I know that a few of you are writing software, so be consistent about this. Don't put your code out there without a license. That should never be done. Because if you, for instance, if you put your code on GitHub without a license, then it means that all the rights are reserved. So you think you're doing a very nice thing, putting it out there, well, you're reserving all the rights, okay? So this is quite an introduction. We have cases at INESC that we use this kind of licenses to commercialize software, but mostly this is a thing. This is an exercise that has to be done with communication experts, and it is about marketing your results, because that's by generating recognition, you also generate and you can measure the impact that you're having. And there are a couple of licenses out there that enable you to do this. And this is my key message for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Catarina. Hello. Hello. Something not working here. Can you call Catarina? Because
It's not working, the mic.
Okay. Okay, yeah. It's working. Thank you, Catarina. I think it's time for some questions. I don't know if you have any questions about what you have listened today. Any questions? Yeah.
I think, well, I have one comment and then I have a question. So the comment...
It's not working again.
Yeah, it is, I think, yeah. So the comment was something I thought about when you were talking about the importance of using a consistent name. So in my field of research, animal welfare science, there was a huge EU project about 10 to 12 years ago, which was at this time when the EU funded mega projects with 20 or more partners. One of the things that they did, in addition to being mega, is they registered the name of the project as a trademark, probably in the very beginning of the project. That's not the only reason why it became a name, but it obviously was one thing. There are lots of things to say about the output of the project, but everyone in my field knows what welfare quality is. because that became really a trademark in the field. So that was my comment. My question was, if you could give a couple of examples of things that, because you know the kind of spheres that we are working in, things that you think that we routinely do not do well or could do much better in terms of exploiting our results.
Okay, so, well, this presentation has to do with content, right? So in content, if you are doing educational content, if you are doing questionnaires, if you are doing measuring scales, that's something that you should definitely put a copyright in it, whatever flavor you want. Put a copyright in it and be consistent again with the name. It's so critical. It's something that I feel that people usually don't really bother, but it's really important. There are a lot of things that you also do here that don't fall here in this kind of categories, which are the research tools. The research tools such as animal models, antibodies, plasmids or vectors or whatever, they frequently you don't have to patent them, or they're not inventive enough for that. But they still can be commercialized and have an impact. And there are companies out there that dedicate themselves to it. So there's a lot more. What I really think it's important is that for a researcher is that there's much more to what you do than patents. Patents are great. They enable a lot of stuff. If you see the European inventor of this year, it's actually a patent on an in vitro diagnostics tool, and it was developed 10 years ago with a patent filed by then, and then he published a lot, Nature, PNAS, and so on, and it enabled all this research and the startup and so on. But there's more to it, because sometimes it's hard to reach a patent, or sometimes it's the thing that you do along the way. It's not really, your core research, but you do something a little bit outside that is of interest to the market. So this is just, so for what I know of what I3S does, I think that there's much more than patents, but it requires a lot more work in actually understanding what you have. And it also requires a lot of proximity and time from the researcher with technology transfer professionals to actually address what is going on. So it's a road. It's not an end goal.
Any more questions? Yeah.
Thank you. It was very enlightening. I was just thinking about defensive publication. This is usually something that I don't know where it falls on your presentation, if it makes any sense here, but I just remember about that. Can you?
Why would you want to do defensive publication?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I was just thinking. I mean, I think from what I read was when you don't want to go for a patent, but anyhow you want to retain some of your work and do it as the first person to be out there with your work. Does that make sense? I don't know.
Well, a lot of things that we read about intellectual property and intellectual property strategy are written for companies. That's why I talked a little bit about trade secrets, but it can be really hard for institutions such as ours to actually use them. And I would think that defensive publication is wasteland. It's a wasteland tactic. Why would you want to do a wasteland tactic in a research environment as ours. Because if you do defensive publication, yes, it marks that you're the first out there. Let's say that the CRISPR papers came out as defensive publication. I know that CRISPR patents are a huge tangle, but would we be discussing patents today and adoption? No. It would be just wasteland. So defensive publications don't fall here. Just as publications, they would fall. But I think that a defensive publication is not a technique for a research institute. It's a technique for a company.
I was thinking about what you said about copyright and creative expression,
Mm-hmm.
not the idea.
Yeah.
Isn't a thin line? Because I was thinking in some cases, like the button
Mm-hmm.
to open the Apple iPhone and
Yeah.
the Samsung
Okay.
adoptions.
Yeah. But those had design patents on it. Okay. So, an idea is something very intellectual without expression. That's how we look at that. It's kind of weird because when we formulate an idea, it's already expressed in our brains, right? But the thing is how I express that idea, how I write it down. I mean, everyone that has ever taught at laboratories wants reports from the students, right? Reports on their experiments. That right? Well, maybe we don't want them, but we have to have them. But and the results may be quite similar, but they are writing discussions in their own way, hopefully. So let's assume that they are original, and they are expressions of the same idea, but still they would come up a little bit different. The content would be more or less the same, but the expression is different. So if I'd done it originally, I would have an intellectual effort. That is what you are trying to protect. Okay, that is your asset. So the thin line is there. It is out there, but that's how we deal with it. It's about an original intellectual effort to get to somewhere. Let me just give you another example, and this is actually in the law. For instance, a translation does not have copyright, but the poetry translation has copyright, because to translate poetry, for it to make sense, maybe you cannot use the same words as the original because you have the metrics and so on, and it is considered to have an intellectual effort towards that.
Any more questions? No? Is there anything in YouTube? No? Okay. Catarina, I would like just to add something, because thank you a lot for talking about communication issues in this matter. I just want to add something, because it happens a lot with us. That is the other way around, that people want to use things that may be under some kind of protection, and we cannot use. Don't force us to use, because we cannot use, okay? And yes, please use i3 as a thing, the unique thing, please. We all win with that. And thank you, Catarina, very much for your talk.
Thank you. Thank you so
welcome.
much.